Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Mask of Civility. Cole Mitchell sat at the head of the mahogany dining table, watching his family through eyes that betrayed nothing. 22 years of marriage, and he had perfected the art of observation. His daughter Aubrey, now 17, bore her mother's sharp features, but thankfully lacked her cruelty. His son Dylan, 15, had inherited Cole's quiet intensity, but used it for teenage brooding rather than strategic planning. Across from him, Brielle picked at her salmon with theatrical disinterest. Her blonde hair was styled differently now, more expensive, more attention-seeking. Everything about her screamed newfound confidence, the kind that came from believing you'd outsmarted someone you considered inferior. "So, Dad," Aubrey began, her voice carrying that particular tone teenagers reserve for topics they found distasteful. "Mom says you're finally going to sign the divorce papers." Cole cut his steak methodically, each slice precise. "Is that what she says?" Trevor Quinn shifted uncomfortably beside Brielle. The man was everything Cole appeared not to be: loud, flashy, successful in the obvious ways that impressed shallow people. His real estate empire had made him wealthy, and he wore that wealth like armor. What Trevor didn't know was that Cole had been studying him for months, learning every detail of his life, his business, his weaknesses. "Well, it's about time," Dylan muttered. "This whole thing is weird." Brielle's fork clinked against her plate. "What's weird is your father's inability to accept reality. Some people grow, Dylan. Some people move on to better things." Cole had been a cryptographer for the Department of Defense for 15 years before transitioning to private cybersecurity consulting. His work required patience, attention to detail, and the ability to see patterns others missed. These skills had served him well in marriage, too. He'd known about Brielle's affair with Trevor for 8 months before she worked up the courage to ask for a divorce. "Better things," Cole repeated quietly. "That's an interesting perspective." Trevor leaned forward, his confidence boosted by what he mistook for Cole's passivity. "Look, Cole, I know this is difficult, but Brielle and we're building something real here. Something lasting." 22 years wasn't lasting enough. 22 years of what? Brielle's voice rose slightly. "You sitting in that office of yours, obsessing over computers and codes while I raised our children alone? Trevor actually talks to me. He takes me places. He makes me feel alive." Cole nodded thoughtfully. During their marriage, he had indeed spent long hours working, but not just on cybersecurity. His real passion project had been something else entirely: a comprehensive digital surveillance network that he'd been refining for years. Every text message, every email, every phone call that passed through certain cellular towers in their city was captured and analyzed. It was illegal, of course, but Cole had learned long ago that legal and necessary were often different things. "You deserve to feel alive," he said to Brielle. "We all do." The restaurant around them buzzed with the usual dinner crowd: families celebrating birthdays and anniversaries, couples on dates, business associates cementing deals. None of them knew they were witnessing the last civil conversation Cole Mitchell would ever have with his family. "The thing is," Trevor continued, emboldened by Cole's apparent acceptance, "we want to do this right. Clean break, fair settlement. I can afford to be generous." Cole's smile was gentle, almost grateful. "That's very kind of you, Trevor." Aubrey looked between her parents, confusion evident on her young face. This wasn't the dramatic confrontation she'd expected. Her father's calm acceptance felt wrong somehow, though she couldn't articulate why. "So you'll sign?" Brielle pressed. "I'll do what needs to be done," Cole replied. "When the time is right." Later, as they walked to their cars in the restaurant parking lot, Cole pulled out his phone and checked a secure app that most of the public had never heard of. The red dots on his screen showed the real-time locations of 17 different people, all connected to Trevor Quinn's business and personal life. Some were employees, some were competitors, some were people Trevor had wronged over the years and forgotten about. Cole had not forgotten about any of them. As he drove home alone to his empty house, Brielle had moved in with Trevor 3 months ago. Cole mentally reviewed the timeline he'd spent months perfecting. Phase 1 would begin tomorrow morning. By the time Phase 3 concluded, Trevor Quinn would understand exactly what kind of man he'd chosen to cross, and Brielle would learn that some bridges, once burned, became funeral pyres. The birthday dinner had been pleasant. The war, however, was about to begin. Chapter 2. The Foundation Cracks. Trevor Quinn's morning routine was predictable. Coffee at 6 a.m., gym by 6:30, office by 8 o'clock. Cole had been tracking these patterns for months, which made it simple to ensure that Trevor's first phone call of the day would come from his biggest client, Grandview Development Corporation. "Trevor, we need to talk," came the voice of Richard Grandview through Trevor's Bluetooth headset as he bench-pressed his usual 200 pounds. "There's been a problem with the Harbor Point project." Trevor finished his rep and sat up, grabbing his towel. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where the EPA is asking questions about soil contamination reports that don't match our environmental impact study. They want to see all correspondence between your firm and our environmental consultants." The weight room around Trevor continued its usual morning rhythm, the clanking of plates, the hum of treadmills, the grunts of exertion. But for Trevor, everything had gone silent except for Richard's voice. "That's impossible," Trevor said. "I personally reviewed those reports. Everything was clean." "Well, apparently someone has emails suggesting otherwise. I'm flying in this afternoon. We need to get ahead of this." What Trevor didn't know was that Cole had spent weeks crafting those emails. Not fake ones. Cole was too careful for such amateur tactics. Instead, he had manipulated Trevor's own email system, using a combination of social engineering and advanced hacking techniques to create genuine communications that painted a picture of environmental cover-ups and regulatory manipulation. The beauty of Cole's approach was its subtlety. Every email was real, every document was authentic, every conversation had actually happened. Cole had simply edited reality. A word changed here, a date modified there, recipients added to conversations they'd never been part of. To any investigator, the evidence would appear completely legitimate because, technically, it was. Across town, Brielle was having her own challenging morning. She'd arrived at her job at Hartfield Marketing to find her assistant, Jennifer, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Mitchell, Ms. Morrison," Jennifer began, using Brielle's maiden name that she'd recently reclaimed. "There's been some confusion about the Coastal Resort account." Brielle poured herself coffee from the break room, savoring the expensive blend that Trevor had introduced her to. Everything was better now. The coffee, the clothes, the car, the prospects. "What kind of confusion?" "They're saying we never delivered the final campaign materials. But I know we sent them last week." "Of course we sent them. I approved the delivery myself." Jennifer bit her lip. "That's just it. I can't find any record of the approval. Or the delivery. And they're threatening to terminate the contract if we don't produce the materials by end of business today." Brielle's confidence wavered. The Coastal Resort account was her biggest success at Hartfield, the achievement that had finally gotten her the recognition she deserved. It was also worth $200,000 to the company and would likely earn her a promotion to senior account manager. "That's ridiculous. Check my email. Check the delivery receipts." But as they searched through Brielle's email history, a disturbing pattern emerged. Messages were missing. Files had been corrupted. Delivery confirmations had mysteriously vanished. It was as if someone had methodically erased weeks of work. What Brielle didn't know was that Cole had been monitoring her work email for months. He knew every client, every project, every deadline. More importantly, he knew exactly how to make her professional life implode without leaving fingerprints. Meanwhile, in his home office, Cole was orchestrating his campaign from behind 6 different computer monitors. His background in cryptography and cybersecurity had taught him to think in systems and networks. Trevor and Brielle weren't just individuals. They were nodes in a complex web of relationships, dependencies, and vulnerabilities. On his primary screen, Cole watched real-time updates from his surveillance network. Trevor was at his office now, frantically making phone calls about the Harbor Point situation. Brielle was at Hartfield, growing increasingly desperate as more of her work mysteriously disappeared. But they were just the primary targets. Cole's real masterpiece was the systematic manipulation of everyone in their orbit. Trevor's business partner, Maria Santos, was discovering that their joint bank account had been flagged for suspicious activity. The red flags weren't random. Cole had carefully structured a series of transactions to trigger money laundering algorithms. Every transfer was legal, every deposit was documented, but the pattern was designed to attract exactly the wrong kind of attention. Brielle's best friend, Kelly, was receiving anonymous packages containing photographs of Brielle and Trevor together. Photos taken before Brielle had asked for the divorce. The timestamps on the photos made it appear that Brielle had been lying about when the affair started, suggesting she'd been cheating for over a year rather than the few months she'd admitted to. At 3 p.m., Cole's phone buzzed with a text from Aubrey. "Dad, are you okay? Mom says you've been acting weird." Cole stared at the message for a long moment. His children were collateral damage in this war, but they were also casualties of Brielle's choices, not his. She had destroyed their family. She had humiliated him publicly. She had chosen to side with his enemy. He typed back, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just working through some things." The truth was, Cole had never been better. For months, he'd felt powerless, watching his wife parade her affair, listening to his children gradually turn against him as Brielle poisoned them with her version of events. But now, finally, he was in control again. By evening, Trevor's world was crumbling. The EPA investigation had expanded to include 3 other projects. 2 major clients had canceled contracts pending the outcome of the environmental inquiry. His business insurance company was reviewing his policies for potential coverage exclusions. Brielle's day had ended even worse. The coastal resort account was lost, along with 2 others that had suffered similar mysterious technical failures. Her boss had called a meeting for Monday morning to discuss her recent performance issues. Neither of them suspected that their problems were connected, or that they were both dancing to the rhythm of a song that Cole Mitchell had been composing for 8 long months. The real symphony, however, was just beginning. Chapter 3: The Birthday Revelation. Cole's 50th birthday arrived on a crisp October evening, and he had chosen Vittorio's, the same upscale Italian restaurant where he'd proposed to Brielle 23 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him, though he doubted anyone else would appreciate the symmetry. The reservation was for 6: Cole, Brielle, Trevor, Aubrey, Dylan, and Cole's brother Marcus, who had driven down from Portland specifically for the occasion. Marcus was the only person who knew the truth about Cole's current situation, and even he didn't know the full scope of what was coming. "This is nice," Marcus said as they were seated, though his eyes held a warning meant only for Cole. "Been a while since we've all been together." Trevor looked every inch the successful businessman despite the stress of his recent professional difficulties. He'd managed to contain the EPA situation, for now, and his lawyer had assured him that the investigation would likely amount to nothing. His confidence was returning, which was exactly what Cole had been counting on. "It has been nice," Brielle agreed, though she kept checking her phone. The coastal resort debacle had cost her the promotion she'd been expecting, and Monday's meeting with her boss loomed like a storm cloud. "Though I'm surprised you wanted us all here together, Cole." "It's my birthday," Cole said simply. 50 years old. Seemed like a good time for family. Aubrey shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Over the past week, she'd been hearing disturbing rumors at school. Friends had mentioned seeing her mother with Trevor months before the separation, in context that suggested a longer relationship than Brielle had admitted. The timeline was becoming confusing, and Aubrey was starting to ask questions that made Brielle defensive. 50 is a big milestone, Trevor said, raising his wine glass. "Here's to new beginnings." Cole raised his own glass, meeting Trevor's eyes with a smile that never quite reached his own. To new beginnings indeed. The first course arrived, and conversation flowed easily enough. Trevor dominated the discussion with stories about his latest real estate ventures, carefully omitting mention of his current legal troubles. Brielle chimed in with updates about her work, also glossing over her recent setbacks. Both of them were performing, Cole realized, putting on shows for an audience they believed they were deceiving. Marcus watched the entire exchange with barely concealed disgust. He'd never liked Brielle, even before learning about the affair, and Trevor struck him as exactly the kind of flashy narcissist who would appeal to his sister-in-law's worst instincts. "So, Dad," Dylan said during a lull in conversation, "Mom says you're finally going to sign the papers." Cole cut his veal methodically, each slice precise and deliberate. "Is that what she says? Well, it's about time." Aubrey chimed in, her voice carrying that particular mixture of teenage certainty and adult disappointment. "This whole separation thing has been going on forever. Dad's a total loser now," she continued, her voice rising with the passion of youth convinced of its own righteousness. "Mom's new husband makes twice the money." The restaurant seemed to quiet around their table, other diners glancing over at the family drama unfolding. Cole noticed the attention but didn't react, continuing to eat his meal as if his daughter hadn't just publicly humiliated him. Trevor's chest swelled with pride and vindication. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, public acknowledgement of his superiority over the quiet man who'd never appreciated what he'd had. Brielle leaned back in her chair, a triumphant smirk playing across her lips. "Best divorce ever," she added, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. Marcus's knuckles went white around his wine glass, but Cole placed a restraining hand on his brother's arm. "Not yet." Cole simply smiled, pulled out his wallet, and placed enough cash on the table to cover the entire bill and a generous tip. The gesture was calm, dignified, and somehow more devastating than any angry outburst could have been. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," he said quietly, standing from the table. As he walked toward the exit, Cole could hear Trevor's nervous laughter, Brielle's defensive justifications to the other diners, and Aubrey's confused question about why he was leaving. But he didn't turn around. Outside in the parking lot, Marcus caught up with him. "Cole, I know what you're planning, and I think—" "You don't know what I'm planning," Cole interrupted gently. "You know what I've told you, which is barely a fraction of what's actually happening. These people aren't worth destroying your life over." Cole turned to face his brother, and for the first time in months, Marcus saw something dangerous flicker behind Cole's calm exterior. "They didn't just leave me, Marcus. They humiliated me. In front of my own children. In front of our friends. In front of the entire town. They've spent months making me the subject of their private jokes, their pillow talk, their shared contempt. But if you—" "Tomorrow morning," Cole continued, "the headlines will break. And everyone will understand why I never defended myself. Why I never fought back. Why I let them think they had won." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "What headlines?" Cole's smile was peaceful, almost serene. "The kind that end careers. The kind that destroy reputations. The kind that teach people what happens when they mistake patience for weakness." As Cole drove home to his empty house, he thought about the elaborate digital timer he'd constructed over the past 8 months. Every email planted, every document altered, every relationship manipulated. All of it had been leading to this moment. At exactly 6 a.m. the next morning, that timer would reach 0. And Trevor Quinn would learn what it meant to go to war with a man who had spent 2 decades learning how to make problems disappear, or in this case, how to make them appear exactly where he wanted them, when he wanted them, with devastating precision. The birthday dinner was over. The real celebration was about to begin. Chapter 4. The morning after. Cole Mitchell woke at 5:30 a.m., precisely as he had every morning for the past 8 months. He made coffee, checked his secure email, and reviewed the automated reports from his surveillance network. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. At 6 a.m., the timer reached 0. Trevor Quinn's phone began ringing while he was still in bed beside Brielle. The caller ID showed his lawyer, which was never a good sign before sunrise. "Trevor, we have a problem," came the voice of David Park, Trevor's attorney. "The FBI raided your office an hour ago." Trevor sat up so quickly that Brielle woke beside him. "What? That's impossible. The EPA thing was contained." "This isn't about the EPA. They have warrants related to money laundering, wire fraud, and racketeering. They've seized your computers, your files, your bank records, everything." What Trevor didn't know was that Cole had spent months carefully constructing a paper trail that connected Trevor's legitimate real estate transactions to a network of shell companies that appeared to be laundering money for organized crime. Every document was real, every transaction was traceable, and every connection led back to Trevor's business in ways that would be impossible to explain as coincidence. Cole's background in cryptography had taught him that the most effective codes were built on true information arranged in misleading patterns. His case against Trevor followed the same principle. Every piece of evidence was authentic, but the story they told together was a masterpiece of misdirection. "That's insane," Trevor said, his voice cracking. "I don't launder money. I don't even know any criminals." But as David continued explaining the scope of the investigation, Trevor realized how bad this looked. His business involved large cash transactions, complex financial structures, and relationships with contractors who might not always follow every regulation to the letter. In the right light, or the wrong light, it could appear exactly like what the FBI was alleging. Across town, Brielle was having her own emergency. Her phone rang 10 minutes after Trevor's, and the voice on the other end belonged to Harold Hartfield, her boss. "Brielle, don't come into the office today. Or any day. You're terminated, effective immediately. Harold, what are you talking about? I know I've had some problems lately, but… Some problems? Harold's voice was incredulous. Brielle, we've discovered that you've been stealing from client accounts for over a year. The audit team found systematic transfers from campaign budgets into personal accounts linked to you and your boyfriend. Brielle's mouth went dry. That's impossible. I never stole anything. But even as she protested, Brielle realized how damning this must look. Trevor had been helping her with some financial planning, setting up accounts and investment strategies. If someone wanted to make those legitimate transactions appear criminal, what she didn't know was that Cole had been systematically creating that appearance for months. Every financial move Trevor had helped her make had been carefully documented and cross-referenced in ways that painted a picture of embezzlement and fraud. Cole had even created fake correspondence between Brielle and Trevor discussing how to hide the stolen money. By 8 a.m., both of their phones were buzzing constantly. News crews were setting up outside Trevor's office building. The story was spreading through their social circle like wildfire. The headlines were exactly what Cole had promised his brother they would be. Local real estate mogul linked to money laundering operation. Marketing executive accused of client fund theft. FBI investigates million-dollar fraud scheme. Marcus Mitchell read the news reports from his hotel room with a mixture of awe and horror. He'd known his brother was planning something, but this was beyond anything he'd imagined. The level of coordination, the depth of planning, the sheer scope of the operation. It was like watching a master chess player reveal that he'd been thinking 20 moves ahead while his opponents were still trying to understand the rules. At 10 a.m., Cole's phone rang. It was Aubrey, and she was crying. Dad, I don't understand what's happening. Everyone at school is talking about Mom and Trevor. They're saying horrible things. Cole felt a momentary pang of sympathy, but it was overwhelmed by the memory of her words at dinner. Dad's a total loser now. Some lessons, he reflected, could only be learned through consequences. I'm sorry you're going through this, sweetheart. Did you know? Did you know this was going to happen? Cole chose his words carefully. I knew that actions have consequences. I knew that people who make certain choices eventually have to face the results of those choices. But Mom says she didn't do anything wrong. She says someone is framing them. Your mother is very good at believing what she wants to believe. There was a long pause on the line. When Aubrey spoke again, her voice was smaller, younger. Everyone's saying that Mom was cheating for a long time. Longer than she told us. What do you think? I think maybe you weren't the loser in this situation. Cole felt a complex mix of satisfaction and sadness. His daughter was learning the truth, but the cost was her innocence about her mother. I'm still your father, Aubrey. No matter what happens, that won't change. But even as he spoke the words, Cole knew they weren't entirely true. Aubrey and Dylan had chosen sides in this war, just as their mother had. They had publicly humiliated him, dismissed him, treated him as an obstacle to their new, better life with Trevor. They were his children, but they were also his betrayers. Forgiveness, Cole had learned long ago, was a luxury he couldn't afford. By noon, Trevor's world had completely collapsed. 3 more clients had terminated contracts. His business insurance company had canceled his policies pending the outcome of the investigation. His bank had frozen his accounts. The bail hearing was scheduled for Monday morning, assuming he could find a lawyer willing to represent him. Brielle was faring no better. Hartfield Marketing had filed a criminal complaint against her. Her personal bank accounts were frozen as part of the investigation. The apartment she'd been sharing with Trevor was connected to his business assets, which meant the FBI had seized that too. Cole watched it all unfold from his home office, monitoring news reports and encrypted communications from his network of contacts. Everything was proceeding exactly as he designed it to. The beautiful thing about his plan was that it was entirely self-sustaining now. The FBI investigation would uncover more evidence, because Cole had placed more evidence to be found. The media coverage would intensify because Cole had been feeding information to reporters for weeks. The social destruction would continue because Cole had spent months poisoning the relationships that might have provided support. Trevor and Brielle weren't just facing legal and financial ruin. They were facing the systematic demolition of their entire lives, orchestrated by a man they had dismissed as harmless. The war was no longer coming. It had arrived, and Cole Mitchell was winning. Chapter 5. The Walls Close In. 3 days after the FBI raid, Trevor Quinn sat in a holding cell awaiting his bail hearing. His arrest had been a media spectacle, cameras capturing him being led away in handcuffs from the penthouse apartment he'd shared with Brielle. The footage had already been replayed hundreds of times on local news. His lawyer, David Park, sat across from him in the interview room, looking haggard. "Trevor, I have to be honest with you. The evidence against you is substantial. They have financial records going back 2 years, email communications, phone records. Everything points to a sophisticated money laundering operation. But I didn't do any of this," Trevor insisted. "Someone is setting me up. That's what everyone says. But the prosecutor has bank records showing transfers from your business accounts to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. They have emails between you and known associates of organized crime figures. They have recorded phone conversations." Trevor's blood ran cold. What phone conversations? David consulted his notes. Conversations with a man named Vincent Torino, discussing real estate purchases that appear to be fronts for laundering drug money. "The recordings are crystal clear, Trevor. It's your voice." What Trevor didn't know was that Vincent Torino was a fictional character Cole had created using sophisticated voice synthesis technology. The recorded conversations were entirely artificial, crafted using samples of Trevor's voice collected over months of surveillance. To any audio expert, they would appear completely authentic because the voice patterns were genuinely Trevor's, just arranged in conversations that had never actually happened. Meanwhile, Brielle was discovering the full scope of her own predicament. She sat in her court-appointed attorney's office, since she could no longer afford private representation, listening to a recitation of charges that seemed impossible. Embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. Attorney Janet Moore read from the case file. "They're alleging that you stole over $400,000 from client accounts over the past 18 months. "I never touched client money," Brielle protested. "Yes, Trevor helped me set up some investment accounts, but everything was legal. The problem is the paper trail. They have documentation showing systematic transfers from campaign budgets to personal accounts registered under fictitious names. But the accounts trace back to your social security number and Trevor's business registration." Janet pulled out a stack of documents. "They also have email chains between you and Trevor discussing how to hide the money, how to create false billing records, even conversations about what to do if you got caught." Brielle stared at the emails in horror. They looked exactly like communications she might have sent, right down to her writing style and usual spelling mistakes. But she had never written them. Someone had crafted perfect forgeries that captured her voice while incriminating her in crimes she'd never committed. Cole had spent weeks studying Brielle's communication patterns, analyzing thousands of her emails and text messages to understand her syntax, vocabulary, and typical errors. The fraudulent emails weren't just forgeries. They were psychological profiles rendered in digital form. Back at his house, Cole was monitoring the investigation through backdoor access to law enforcement databases he'd cultivated during his years in government service. The FBI agents working the case were thorough and professional, following every lead exactly as Cole had anticipated they would. Special Agent Sarah Chun was particularly impressive. She'd uncovered connections that even Cole hadn't explicitly planted, finding legitimate criminal associations in Trevor's past that made the false allegations more believable. Trevor's college roommate had been arrested for drug dealing 15 years ago. A contractor Trevor had used for several projects had ties to organized crime. These real connections provided the foundation that made Cole's fictional conspiracy seem entirely plausible. Cole's phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. "Dad, can you come pick me up? I don't want to stay at Mom's friend's house anymore." This was interesting. Cole had wondered how long it would take for the children to realize that their mother's new life wasn't as stable as they believed. He drove to Kelly's house, where Brielle and the kids had been staying since the FBI seized Trevor's apartment. Dylan was waiting on the front porch with a duffel bag, looking older than his 15 years. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, son. Rough couple of days." Dylan got into the car without looking back at the house. "Mom keeps crying and making phone calls. Trevor's in jail. Everyone at school knows about it. Kelly's getting tired of having us there." As they drove home, Dylan was unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke up. "Dad, did Mom really steal all that money?" Cole considered his answer carefully. "What do you think?" I think I don't know Mom as well as I thought I did. People sometimes surprise us. She keeps saying someone is framing her and Trevor." But who would do that? Cole smiled slightly. Someone with a lot of time, patience, and motivation, I imagine. That evening, while Dylan was upstairs doing homework, Cole received a call from Marcus. Jesus Christ, Cole. I've been following the news. This is bigger than I thought. It needed to be comprehensive. Comprehensive? You've destroyed them completely. Their lives are over. Their lives were over the moment they decided to humiliate me publicly. I just made sure everyone else could see it too. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. What about the kids? Cole looked up the stairs toward Dylan's room. They chose sides, Marcus. They made their feelings about me very clear at that birthday dinner. Actions have consequences. They're still your children. And they're also old enough to understand loyalty and betrayal. Aubrey called me a loser in front of a restaurant full of people. Dylan sat there and let it happen. They wanted a new family with Trevor? Well, now they can see what Trevor is really worth. The next morning brought more headlines. Trevor's bail had been denied due to flight risk. Brielle had been arrested at Kelly's house in front of the children, led away in handcuffs while neighbors watched from their windows. The local news was calling it the biggest white-collar crime story in the city's history. Cole read the coverage while eating breakfast, noting with satisfaction how perfectly the narrative was developing. Every new revelation seemed to confirm the previous ones. Every piece of evidence reinforced the overall pattern. The prosecutors weren't just building a case. They were telling a story, and it was exactly the story Cole had written for them. His phone rang. Aubrey, calling from Kelly's house. Dad, they arrested Mom. She's in jail. What are we supposed to do? For the first time since this began, Cole heard genuine fear in his daughter's voice. Not teenage drama or manufactured crisis, but real terror at watching her world collapse. You can come stay with me, he said quietly. But what about Mom? What about Trevor? This is all some huge mistake, right? Cole closed his eyes. Even now, even with the evidence overwhelming, Aubrey was still choosing to believe in her mother's innocence rather than accept the possibility that she had been wrong about everything. Come home, Aubrey. We'll figure it out from there. But as he hung up the phone, Cole knew that some bridges had been burned too completely to ever rebuild. His children would always be welcome in his house, but they would never again be welcome in his heart. They had shown him who they really were when they thought he was powerless to fight back. Now they would learn who he really was, and why forgiveness was a luxury he could no longer afford. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. The courtroom was packed for Trevor's preliminary hearing. Cole sat in the back row, wearing a simple black suit and watching the proceedings with the calm attention of someone observing a chess match he'd already won. The media had turned this into a spectacle, and every major news outlet in the region had sent reporters. Trevor looked haggard after a week in county jail. His expensive suit had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit, and the confident swagger that had once defined him was nowhere to be seen. Beside him, his new attorney, David Park, had recused himself due to conflicts of interest, shuffled through documents with barely concealed desperation. District Attorney Lisa Rodriguez presented the case with clinical precision. Your Honor, the defendant is accused of operating a complex money laundering scheme that processed over $3.2 million in illegal funds through his real estate business. The evidence includes bank records, email communications, recorded phone conversations, and testimony from federal agents. As the prosecutor outlined the charges, Cole mentally checked off each element of the case he'd spent months constructing. The beauty of his plan was that every piece of evidence was technically authentic. Bank records were real, just mislabeled. Email communications were genuine, just redirected. Phone recordings were actual conversations, just edited and context shifted. Trevor's attorney, Robert Hayes, rose to respond. Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence of all charges. We believe he's been the victim of an elaborate frame-up designed to destroy his reputation and business. Judge Morrison looked skeptical. Mr. Hayes, do you have any evidence to support this frame-up theory? We're investigating several leads, Your Honor, but you have nothing concrete at this time? No, Your Honor. Cole almost smiled. Robert Hayes was actually correct. Trevor was the victim of an elaborate frame-up. But proving it would require them to unravel a conspiracy so sophisticated and comprehensive that it would take years to fully understand, assuming they could even identify where to begin looking. The judge set bail at $2 million, effectively ensuring Trevor would remain in custody. As the defendant was led away, Cole noticed Trevor scanning the courtroom gallery, perhaps looking for Brielle or someone else who might provide support. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Cole saw recognition flicker across Trevor's face. After the hearing, Cole walked to his car through a crowd of reporters shouting questions at anyone who looked like they might be connected to the case. He ignored them completely, driving home through streets that had become familiar battlegrounds in his war of revenge. At home, he found Aubrey and Dylan in the living room, both looking lost and confused. They'd been staying with him for 3 days now, ever since Brielle's arrest. The arrangement was awkward for everyone involved. "How's Mom?" Aubrey asked immediately. "I wasn't there to see your mother. I was observing Trevor's hearing." Dylan looked up from his phone. "They denied his bail. It's all over social media." Cole nodded. Not surprising, given the charges. "Dad?" Aubrey's voice carried a pleading quality he hadn't heard since she was much younger. "Mom says someone is doing this to her, and Trevor on purpose. She says it's too convenient that everything went wrong at the same time. Your mother is facing serious criminal charges. It's natural for her to look for alternative explanations. But what if she's right? What if someone really is framing them?" Cole sat down across from his children, studying their faces. Aubrey still clung to hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Dylan was beginning to accept reality, but hadn't yet grasped the full implications. Neither of them understood that they were looking at the architect of their mother's destruction. If someone were capable of orchestrating something this complex, Cole said carefully, they would have to be extremely sophisticated, patient, methodical. They would need access to advanced technology, detailed knowledge of financial systems, and months or even years to put all the pieces in place. "Like someone who works in cybersecurity?" Dylan asked quietly. Cole met his son's eyes. There was something different there now, a wariness that hadn't existed a week ago. Dylan was starting to put pieces together, even if he couldn't yet accept the conclusions they pointed toward. Hypothetically, yes. Someone with that background would have the necessary skills. Aubrey was oblivious to the subtext. Then you could help prove Mom's innocence, right? You could use your computer skills to find out who's really doing this. "I could investigate," Cole agreed. "If I were motivated to do so." "What do you mean, if you were motivated?" Aubrey's voice rose with frustration. "She's our mother. Of course you should help her." Cole stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street where he'd lived for the past 12 years. Everything looked normal. Kids riding bikes, neighbors walking dogs, the usual rhythms of middle-class life. But beneath that surface normalcy, Cole had been waging a war that would reshape multiple lives forever. "Your mother made her choices, Aubrey. She chose to have an affair. She chose to ask for a divorce. She chose to move in with Trevor. She chose to humiliate me publicly at my own birthday dinner. But that doesn't mean she's a criminal." Cole turned back to face his children. "Doesn't it? She betrayed the most fundamental promise of our marriage. She lied to me for months about her relationship with Trevor. She turned you both against me with her version of events. Why is financial betrayal so much worse than emotional betrayal?" Dylan was staring at his father with growing comprehension. "Dad, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that people who make certain choices eventually face the consequences of those choices. Your mother chose to destroy our family. Now she's discovering what it feels like to have her life destroyed in return." Aubrey's face went pale. "You're talking like you know something. Like you had something to do with this." Cole looked at his daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She had her mother's eyes, her mother's stubbornness, and increasingly, her mother's ability to ignore uncomfortable truths. "I had everything to do with this," he said quietly. The room went silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. Dylan's phone slipped from his fingers onto the couch. Aubrey's mouth opened and closed without sound. "You destroyed Mom's life because she wanted a divorce?" Aubrey finally whispered. "I destroyed your mother's life because she chose to wage war against me, and she assumed I was too weak to fight back. She was wrong." Dylan found his voice. "Dad, this is insane. You can't destroy people because they hurt your feelings." Cole's expression hardened. "Hurt my feelings? Is that what you think this was about?" He walked to his desk and pulled out a thick folder filled with photographs, printed emails, and surveillance reports. "Your mother didn't just leave me, Dylan. She spent months planning this divorce while pretending to work on our marriage. She emptied our joint savings account and transferred the money to accounts Trevor helped her set up. She told our friends that I was abusive, that I had threatened her, that she was afraid of me. She poisoned you both against me with lies about why our marriage failed. Cole threw the folder onto the coffee table, its contents spilling across the surface. She turned my own children against me, made me the villain in a story where I was the victim, and then celebrated her victory in front of a restaurant full of strangers. Aubrey stared at the photographs, images of her mother and Trevor together months before the official separation, bank records showing financial transfers she'd never known about, printed text messages revealing conversations about finally getting rid of Cole. So yes, Cole continued, I fought back. And I won. Dylan picked up one of the surveillance photos, his hands shaking. How long have you been planning this? Since the day I realized your mother was cheating. 8 months of preparation. 8 months of watching, waiting, and building the perfect trap. Aubrey was crying now, but Cole felt no sympathy. These were the children who had publicly called him a loser, who had celebrated Trevor's superiority, who had chosen sides in a war they didn't understand. You're both welcome to stay here as long as you need to, Cole said, gathering up the scattered documents. But understand this, I don't forgive betrayal. Ever. From anyone. Including family. As he walked toward his office, Dylan called after him. Dad, what happens now? Cole paused at the doorway. Now your mother and Trevor discover what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. The trials will probably last 6 months. They'll both be convicted. Trevor will get 10 to 15 years in federal prison. Your mother will get 5 to 8. And us. Cole looked back at his children. His son who was beginning to understand the depth of his father's capacity for revenge. His daughter who was still struggling to accept that her perfect new life had been built on lies and criminal activity. You learn to live with the consequences of the choices you made. Just like everyone else. The war was over. Cole Mitchell had won completely. But victory, he was discovering, was a cold and solitary thing. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 6 weeks after the arrests, Cole received an unexpected visitor. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chin stood on his doorstep at 7 a.m., badge in hand, professional but clearly exhausted. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Agent Chun. I'm investigating the Quinn Morrison case. Could we talk? Cole invited her in, offered coffee, and settled into his living room chair with the calm demeanor of someone who had nothing to hide because he'd been careful never to leave anything that could be found. I have to say, Mr. Mitchell, this case has some unusual elements. How so? Agent Chin opened her tablet and scrolled through what appeared to be hundreds of pages of notes. The evidence against your ex-wife and Mr. Quinn is overwhelming. Almost perfectly constructed, you might say. Every piece supports every other piece. Every lead confirms the overall narrative. In 23 years of federal investigation, I've never seen a conspiracy case this comprehensive. Cole sipped his coffee. Thorough criminals, I suppose. Or a thorough frame-up. They sat in silence for a moment, each studying the other. Cole recognized that Agent Chun was exceptionally intelligent and had probably identified inconsistencies in the case that would take most investigators months to discover. Mr. Mitchell, what do you do for a living? Cybersecurity consulting. I help companies protect their digital assets from sophisticated attacks. And before that, 15 years with the Department of Defense. Cryptography and digital intelligence. Agent Chin made notes on her tablet. So you'd have the technical expertise to create false digital evidence. Email communications, bank records, phone recordings. Hypothetically, yes. But that would be illegal. Hypothetically. Agent Chin smiled without warmth. Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to share something with you off the record. This case is falling apart. Cole felt a momentary flutter of alarm, but kept his expression neutral. In what way? The recordings of Mr. Quinn's phone conversations with alleged crime figures? Our audio analysts are finding inconsistencies. The voice patterns match Mr. Quinn perfectly, but there are micro-variations in tone and breathing that suggest digital synthesis. Interesting. The email communications between your ex-wife and Mr. Quinn discussing money laundering? Our forensic team has found evidence of metadata manipulation. The messages were created on the right dates, but not at the times claimed. Agent Chin leaned forward. Someone with extremely sophisticated technical skills has constructed an elaborate false narrative. Someone who understands federal investigation procedures well enough to create evidence that would survive initial scrutiny, but not deep forensic analysis. Cole set down his coffee cup. And you think that someone is me? I think that someone is you." They stared at each other across the living room where Cole had sat with his children 6 weeks earlier, confessing his role in their mother's destruction. Agent Chun was clearly hoping for some kind of reaction: anger, fear, defensive explanations. Instead, Cole simply nodded. "Prove it." "Excuse me." "Prove it," Cole repeated calmly. "You've identified flaws in the evidence. You suspect digital manipulation. You believe I have motive and opportunity. But can you prove that I created false evidence?" Agent Chen's confidence wavered slightly. "We're working on that." "Agent Chun, I spent 15 years learning how to make digital evidence disappear completely. If I wanted to frame someone, do you really think I'd be sloppy enough to leave forensic breadcrumbs for you to follow? Then why are we finding inconsistencies?" Cole stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his quiet suburban street. "Because I wanted you to find them." Agent Chun was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. "You wanted us to know that Quinn and Morrison were framed? I wanted you to know that they were framed by someone with the capability to frame anyone, anytime, for anything. Someone who could make you disappear into the federal prison system just as easily as I made them disappear." Cole turned back to face Agent Chun. "You're investigating me because you're intelligent and thorough, but you're also investigating me because I'm allowing you to investigate me. If I wanted this conversation never to happen, you'd wake up tomorrow morning facing charges for crimes you never committed, supported by evidence you couldn't possibly refute. Are you threatening a federal agent? I'm explaining the reality of your situation. You know I'm guilty. You suspect you can't prove it. And now you're wondering whether pushing too hard might result in your own life being destroyed." Agent Chin closed her tablet and stood up. "Mr. Mitchell, fabricating evidence is a federal crime. Intimidating federal agents is a federal crime. Even if we can't prove the frame-up, we can pursue charges for obstruction of justice, witness tampering, computer fraud." "You could try," Cole agreed. "But that would require you to explain to your supervisors how you allowed yourself to be outmaneuvered by a suburban cybersecurity consultant. It would require admitting that months of investigation led you to conclusions you can't substantiate in court. It would require acknowledging that someone committed the perfect crime right under your nose." Cole walked Agent Chin to the door. "Your case against Trevor and Brielle is solid because I wanted it to be solid. If you try to build a case against me, you'll discover that I'm very good at making cases fall apart." After Agent Chin left, Cole returned to his office and began implementing Phase 4 of his plan, the phase he'd hoped wouldn't be necessary but had prepared for nonetheless. If federal investigators were getting too close to the truth, it was time to redirect their attention elsewhere. By noon, Agent Chun would discover that her own financial records showed suspicious transactions. Her personal email would reveal correspondence with known criminal associates. Her phone records would indicate communications that violated FBI protocols. None of it would be true, of course, but all of it would be impossible to disprove quickly enough to prevent her from being suspended pending investigation. Cole had learned long ago that the best defense was always a superior offense. Agent Chun was intelligent, dedicated, and honest. She was also about to discover what happened to people who threatened Cole Mitchell's carefully constructed new reality. The war wasn't over after all. It was just expanding to include new enemies. And Cole Mitchell never, ever lost. Chapter 8. The Final Gambit. 3 months after the arrests, Trevor Quinn's federal trial began with media coverage that had turned the case into a national sensation. Cole attended every day, sitting in his usual spot in the back row, watching his masterpiece unfold in a federal courtroom. The prosecution's case was devastating and comprehensive. Financial records showed systematic money laundering through Trevor's real estate business. Email communications revealed explicit discussions of criminal activity. Recorded phone conversations captured Trevor apparently negotiating deals with organized crime figures. Bank records traced millions of dollars through shell companies designed to hide illegal profits. Trevor's defense attorney, Robert Hayes, had developed a strategy around the frame-up theory, but it was falling apart under the weight of evidence. Even the forensic inconsistencies that Agent Chun had identified weren't enough to overcome the sheer volume of incriminating material. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Prosecutor Lisa Rodriguez said during her opening statement, "the evidence will show that Trevor Quinn operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise for over 2 years, using his legitimate real estate business as a front for money laundering operations that processed over $3.2 million in illegal funds. Cole watched Trevor's face as the charges were read. The confident swagger was long gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of a man watching his life being systematically destroyed by forces he couldn't understand or control. Brielle's trial was scheduled to begin 2 weeks later, but her situation was even worse than Trevor's. Without Trevor's resources, she'd been forced to rely on a public defender who was handling 37 other cases simultaneously. The evidence against her was equally comprehensive: financial records, email communications, and testimony from former colleagues at Hartfield Marketing who had been convinced she was guilty. During a recess, Cole stepped outside the courthouse for air and found Dylan waiting by his car. "Dad, we need to talk." Over the past 3 months, Dylan had been staying with Marcus in Portland, refusing to live in the same house as his father. Aubrey had chosen to remain with Cole, though their relationship was strained and artificial. "What can I do for you, son?" Dylan looked older than his 16 years, worn down by months of media attention and social isolation. "I want you to stop this." "Stop what?" "You know what. This whole thing. The trials, the evidence, everything. I know you did this to them, and I want you to make it stop." Cole leaned against his car, studying his son. "Even if I could make it stop, which I can't, since the federal government doesn't take orders from me. Why would I?" "Because they're going to prison, Dad. Mom's going to prison for years because you wanted revenge. Your mother is going to prison because she committed crimes. Crimes you made her commit. Crimes you set her up for." People were starting to stare at the teenager shouting in the courthouse parking lot. Cole placed a restraining hand on Dylan's arm. "Lower your voice." "No." Dylan shook off his father's grip. "I won't lower my voice. You destroyed our family because your feelings got hurt. You sent our mother to prison because she wanted a divorce. You ruined innocent people's lives for revenge." Cole's patience finally snapped. "Innocent people? Your mother stole money from our joint accounts to fund her new life with Trevor. She lied to you and Aubrey about why our marriage ended. She turned my own children against me and then celebrated her victory publicly. Trevor helped her hide assets, manipulate financial records, and plan a divorce strategy designed to leave me with nothing. But they didn't launder money for criminals. No, they didn't. But they did commit fraud, theft, and conspiracy. I just made sure they faced consequences for different crimes than the ones they actually committed." Dylan stared at his father with a mixture of horror and fascination. "You're insane." "I'm thorough. There's a difference. What happens when this is over? When Mom and Trevor are in prison and Aubrey and I hate you forever? What do you win?" Cole considered the question seriously. Over the past few months, he'd been asking himself the same thing. His revenge had been complete and devastating, but the victory felt increasingly hollow. "I win the knowledge that people who betray me face consequences. I win the certainty that no one will underestimate me again. I win the peace that comes from balancing the scales." "You win nothing," Dylan said quietly. "You destroyed your family to prove a point that no one but you cares about." As Dylan walked away, Cole felt something he hadn't experienced since this whole campaign began: doubt. Not about his methods or his justification, but about the ultimate value of what he'd accomplished. That evening, he sat in his empty house and reviewed the files he'd compiled over the past year. Thousands of documents, hundreds of photographs, months of surveillance data, weeks of manufactured evidence. It was a masterpiece of planning and execution, but it was also the record of a man who had allowed his need for revenge to consume everything else in his life. His phone rang. Aubrey, calling from upstairs. "Dad, can you come up here? I want to show you something." He found her in her room, laptop open to a news article about children of convicted criminals. The headline read, "Living in the Shadow of Infamy: How High-Profile Crimes Affect Families." "I've been reading about kids whose parents went to prison for famous crimes," Aubrey said without looking at him. "Do you know what happens to them?" Cole sat on the edge of her bed. "Tell me." "They get bullied at school. They can't make friends because everyone knows who their parents are. They have trouble getting into colleges because admissions committees remember the news stories. They spend their whole lives being defined by things their parents did." Aubrey finally looked at her father. "That's going to be me and Dylan. For the rest of our lives, we're going to be the kids whose mother went to prison for money laundering. Every time someone Googles our names, they'll find articles about Mom and Trevor." Cole felt a cold weight settling in his chest. In all his months of planning, he had considered the impact on Trevor and Brielle, the satisfaction of seeing them destroyed, the justice of making them pay for their betrayals. But he had never really considered the long-term consequences for his children. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Are you? Are you really sorry, or are you just saying that?" Cole looked at his daughter, 17 years old, facing a future shaped by his need for revenge, and realized that his war had claimed casualties he'd never intended to target. "I'm sorry that you and Dylan are paying a price for choices your mother and I made. But I'm not sorry that I fought back when I was attacked." Aubrey nodded slowly. "I know. And that's the problem, isn't it? You're never going to be sorry for what you did to them, even when you see what it's doing to us." As Cole returned to his office, he reflected on Agent Chin's investigation, which had mysteriously stalled after she was suspended for her own alleged financial irregularities. The federal prosecutor's office had quietly dropped any inquiry into the authenticity of evidence in the Quinn Morrison case. Trevor and Brielle would be convicted based on manufactured evidence, and no one in authority wanted to dig deep enough to discover the truth. Cole Mitchell had committed the perfect crime, but as he sat alone in his empty house, listening to his daughter cry in the room above him, he was beginning to understand that perfect crimes could have imperfect consequences. The war was ending, but the casualties would last a lifetime. Chapter 9, Victory's Price. The verdicts came down on a cold February morning, exactly 1 year after Cole's birthday dinner at Vittorio's. Trevor Quinn was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Brielle Morrison was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 7 years. Cole watched from his usual seat in the back row as the sentences were read. Trevor stared straight ahead, showing no emotion. Brielle wept quietly, her public defender offering useless comfort. Neither of them looked back at the gallery, where Cole sat alone. Their families had long since abandoned them. Their friends had distanced themselves, and their children had been permanently marked by their parents' crimes. It was, by any measure, a complete victory. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed the area looking for statements from anyone connected to the case. Cole walked through the crowd unnoticed, just another observer, another curious citizen interested in seeing justice served. At home, he found the house empty. Aubrey had moved to Portland to live with Marcus and finish her senior year there, away from the media attention and social stigma. Dylan had already been there for months. Both of his children had decided they wanted nothing to do with their father's version of justice. Cole poured himself a drink and sat in his office, surrounded by the monitors and files that had been his weapons in this war. For the first time in over a year, he had nothing to plan, no moves to calculate, no enemies to outmaneuver. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Saw the news. Hope you're satisfied. The kids are doing better here, by the way. Dylan might actually graduate on time, and Aubrey's college applications are going well. They don't talk about you much." Cole stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. Over the following weeks, Cole found himself struggling with an unexpected emotion: emptiness. The campaign that had consumed his life for over a year was finished. His enemies were destroyed. His revenge was complete. But instead of satisfaction, he felt only a hollow sense of purposelessness. He returned to his cybersecurity consulting work, but it felt trivial after orchestrating the destruction of 2 people's lives. Clients brought him problems that seemed insignificant compared to the complex psychological and technical challenges of his revenge campaign. 3 months after the sentencing, Cole received an unexpected letter. The return address showed it was from Brielle, postmarked from the Federal Women's Correctional Facility where she was serving her sentence. "Cole, I know you'll probably throw this away without reading it, but I had to try. I've had a lot of time to think over the past few months, and I wanted you to know that I understand what you did. I know you framed Trevor and me. I don't know how you did it, and I can't prove it, but I know. The evidence was too perfect, too comprehensive, too convenient. You spent months planning this, didn't you? I also know why you did it. Not just because I had an affair, not just because I asked for a divorce, but because of how I did it. Because I humiliated you. Because I made you feel powerless. Because I turned the kids against you and celebrated your defeat publicly. I was cruel, Cole. I was vindictive and petty and deliberately hurtful in ways that had nothing to do with wanting out of our marriage and everything to do with wanting to make you suffer. I guess I succeeded. But here's what I want you to know. I'll survive this. I'll serve my time, and I'll get out, and I'll rebuild my life. Trevor will too, Eventually. We're not broken people, just people who made bad choices and got caught. But what about Aubrey and Dylan? What about your children, who didn't choose any of this? They're carrying the weight of your revenge, Cole. They're paying the price for our war. I hope it was worth it. Brielle. Cole read the letter 3 times before filing it away with all his other documentation from the case. Brielle was right about everything. He had framed them, he had planned it meticulously, and the children were indeed paying a price for his revenge. But she was wrong about one thing. It hadn't been worth it. 6 months later, Cole received graduation announcements for both of his children. Aubrey had been accepted to Portland State University with a full academic scholarship. Dylan had not only graduated high school, but had been accepted to Oregon Institute of Technology for Computer Science. Neither announcement included an invitation to the ceremonies. Cole sat in his empty house, looking at the graduation photos Marcus had texted him. Aubrey in her cap and gown, Dylan shaking hands with his principal, both of them smiling genuinely for the first time in over a year. They looked happy, free, unburdened by the weight of their father's need for revenge. His phone rang. Marcus. Cole, the kids want to talk to you. Both of them. Both of them. They've been in therapy, and they think they're ready to have a conversation. Not about reconciliation, not about forgiveness, but about closure, I guess. When? This weekend. I'll drive them down. That Saturday, Cole met his children in a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Portland where they could talk without the emotional weight of returning to their childhood home. Aubrey looked older, more mature. Dylan had grown several inches and carried himself with new confidence. Both of them studied their father with expressions that mixed wariness with something that might have been pity. Dad, Aubrey began, we want you to know that we understand why you did what you did. We understand that Mom hurt you, that we hurt you, that you felt like you had to fight back. Dylan nodded. But we also want you to know that we can't have a relationship with you anymore. Not because we don't love you, but because we can't trust you. Cole felt something break inside his chest. I never hurt you. I never targeted you. You destroyed our mother, Aubrey said quietly. You sent her to prison for crimes she didn't commit. You made us complicit in your revenge by letting us believe she was guilty. You turned our family into a cautionary tale that will follow us for the rest of our lives. She betrayed me. She betrayed our family. And you destroyed her for it, Dylan said. Completely, utterly, without mercy. If you could do that to someone you loved for 22 years, what would you do to us if we disappointed you again? Cole opened his mouth to protest, but the words died in his throat. His children were right to be afraid of him. He had proven himself capable of anything in service of his need for revenge. We're going to change our names, Aubrey said. We're going to legally become Aubrey and Dylan Walker, Mom's maiden name. We want to be able to build lives that aren't defined by what happened to our family. We'll always be your children, Dylan added. But we can't be your family anymore. As they prepared to leave, Aubrey turned back one last time. Dad, I hope someday you understand that winning isn't the same as being right. And revenge isn't the same as justice. Cole sat alone in the coffee shop for hours after they left, thinking about the price of his perfect victory. He had destroyed his enemies completely, but in doing so, he had also destroyed his family, isolated himself from everyone who had ever loved him, and turned himself into exactly the kind of man his children were right to fear. Trevor and Brielle would eventually be released from prison. They would rebuild their lives, find new relationships, perhaps even achieve happiness again. They would survive his revenge because they were fundamentally decent people who had made bad choices. But Cole Mitchell would spend the rest of his life alone, surrounded by the tools and trophies of his perfect war, having won everything he thought he wanted and lost everything that had actually mattered. He had sought justice and achieved revenge. He had demanded satisfaction and received isolation. He had proven his superiority and confirmed his emptiness. In the end, Cole Mitchell had won the war so completely that there was nothing left to rule over but the ruins of his own life. The silent storm had passed, leaving only silence behind. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.